Northern Ireland and Scotland tonight. Some heavy showers for England and Wales and a low of 2 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Very good evening to you. 9:03 on LBC. We are streaming this hour live on Global Player as well, if you'd like to watch our proceedings, because we have one of the most handsome comedians in the country with us. Well, we booked him, but he couldn't do it, so Geoff Norcott's here.
I was doing a performative look over my shoulder now. So have you booked Joel Dommett? Eh?
No.
At least his hair and his eyebrows nearly meet.
Well, we're not going to talk about comedy in this. Well, I don't think we are, but we are going to talk about university. And you think, well, why are we going to talk about university with Geoff Norcott? Well, he's made a documentary, which you may have seen on Monday. It's available on the BBC iPlayer. It's called Is University Really Worth It? And it's a fascinating subject. And I think those of us of a certain age who were the first in our families to go to university and didn't have the burden of a student loan, we had all of our fees paid for us, we even got student grants. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at university, and this is like 1981 to 85 at the University of East Anglia, or University of Easy Access, as we used to call it in those days, where I am now, believe it or not, a visiting professor of politics and broadcasting. I mean, get me.
Get you.
My mother would be really proud of that.
I mean, Easy Access. I mean, look, we're not doing comedy this hour. I'm not going to say what just came into my head.
Go on.
Easy Access. I mean, it sounded like your nickname at uni. There you go. I said it. I've got it out of the way. Now we'll talk about serious stuff.
Oh dear, it's all downhill from here, isn't it? Or maybe uphill. Now, why did you, I mean, were you approached to do this documentary, or was it your idea? Why did you want to do it?
So I was thinking about the fact that I was, just like you, the first person in my family to go to university in the 90s. And I think for a lot of working class families who, when you were the first, it was a real threshold that you crossed together as a family. I remember my mum came to the presentation. She was bawling her eyes out. Somewhat performatively. She wanted everyone to know that it was a big deal. They actually went over to check that she was all right.
That's my boy.
Yeah, literally that, Ian. Literally that. And then it was an incredible moment. And I always kind of presumed, I guess, that would then be a threshold that we cross once in the family, and then I would want the same thing for my son. But I suppose I was looking at this year, because I'm very anally retentive about saving pots and stuff like that. I didn't want my son necessarily to have to get in debt. I thought, well, I want a 10-year sort of plan saving for him, but also need a new car.
How old is he?
He's eight. He's eight. But I plan ahead. And I kind of thought, but it was just a sort of starting point for that process where I thought, I changed my opinion without really realising it. I've absorbed some of what I've heard about, the strikes, about how students were treated during COVID. I've used common sense in terms of understanding how the sort of preponderance of young people with degrees would have changed the equation somewhat. We're now talking 40% of people have degrees versus, I think it was 4% in the early 60s. So you feel like instinctively that would change their value. Maybe where once upon a time a degree was a way of getting a very good job, maybe it's become a way of getting any job at all, which would be fine if it didn't cost so much. I mean, that is the issue. So yeah, I had a chat with the BBC, and in fairness, I mean, like the graduate entry there is like well over 90%, so I thought they might tell me to sling my hook.
Mostly from Oxford and Cambridge, still.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sort of skews one way, right? But in fairness to them, they were interested. They thought that I had some interesting arguments, and they set me out on the road to sort of test. I mean, it is a polemic, I'll say that up front. I mean, my starting point was that my hunch was certainly that it's not as worth it as it used to be, and we set out on the road to basically do a stock take and an audit of the university sector as it is.
So give me the three conclusions that you came to at the end of it.
One of the big ones, grade inflation, was a massive issue in terms of employers' perceptions of the worth of grades. So between 2010 and 2020, the number of firsts being awarded doubled, right? Now, I would love to think that students just got twice as clever, worked twice as hard, but doesn't really pass the sniff test, does it? So what you're doing, I guess because they're clients now, they pay a lot of money, but what you're doing there is you're sort of sending out a message that something has less worth, which also affects all the people that have got degrees before that.
That's just reflective of what's happened on GCSEs and A-levels, isn't it, though? I mean, I think it's wrong.
It's more so,
in my group at university, bear in mind I graduated in 1985, there would have been about 40 of us doing the kind of course that I was doing. 3 got firsts. And that's how it should be, isn't it?
First were these exclusive things. I mean, they were very rare. You know, I was lucky enough to get a 2-1. I was nowhere near a first.
All the best people do, Geoff.
All the best people get a 2-1. Yeah, I didn't get cocky after that. I knew I still had a long way to go.
I knew I punched above my weight, believe me.
I fluked it. I'll be honest. I didn't do anything for the first 2 years. But I mean, they're clients, though. That's the difference. You talk about A-levels and GCSEs, that's a fair point. But they're not paying for their education at that age. And also, the rate of increase in degrees is higher than any other academic sector. The other thing that struck me, and this is slightly, people might take issue with this, but the treatment of some universities of their students during COVID. There are now, I think, 150,000 students who are, for various reasons, part of a legal action, saying that they want some kind of refund, because part of that is to do with the amount of strikes and the hours that they've lost teaching. But some of them, went to colleges that were very slow to resume face-to-face tuition, very slow. And some universities increased their students, because obviously they could have you can have as many people as you want in a lecture theatre if it's a Zoom, right? It's not quite the same, I think, sort of waving at people in the chat area. And is the overall cost. I mean, it's been capped for a while at 9,250. But meanwhile, the cost of living has gone up. And this is a thing that maybe not a lot of people are aware of. Benefits have been upgraded with inflation, pensions have. But the amount that students can borrow has not been upgraded in line with inflation. So rents have gone up. Materially, they are way worse off. And in the film, when people, if people are good enough to watch it, there is a medicine student called Malia, who I think really, it's a really sobering moment, the conditions that she's living in and having to work in, just to try and care for people, to try and give medical help.
I mean, how, apart from the grade inflation, how do you think things have changed since you went to university?
Well, it's how serious students are. I mean, I went to Goldsmiths in the mid-90s. First up, I didn't fit in there at all. I mean, it was a bizarre choice. But that, I mean, it's a very liberal arts college, right? I didn't even know Iain. They were all trying to save the whale and save Cuba. They were all trying to save all these things, and they were all very sort of middle class. But literally, because I didn't have to pay for it, I genuinely looked at it as which is the closest to where I lived in Mitcham at the time. Where can I commute from? I didn't have any of that family background. But that, I guess, is a decision that you can make when you're not taking on £45,000 to £50,000 worth of debt. Now, they used to be some of the rowdiest comedy gigs in the country, student gigs, because they'd be drinking midweek. Absolutely not now. You can hear the coffee machine. The only heckle is the sound of the macchiatos being made. I mean, this sounds like one of those lazy gags about all students eat avocado, and there are a couple of gags like that in the documentary, I admit. But genuinely, the last student gig I did was the sound of the coffee machine was whirring away in the background, because it's totally understandable if they're paying that.
Great material, though.
The one thing that a joke doesn't need is distractions. And the other thing is, when you hear a coffee machine, everyone just thinks, oh, I quite like a coffee. And so you tend to lose the room. But they're a much more serious generation of young people. And I felt for them. And I know that I've had a little bit of backlash from people who work in the higher education sector, because they feel attacked. I'm not saying that they're not trying their best.
But you weren't attacking them.
I didn't think so, but there was one or two people that felt that it was maybe a bit too polemical. But I thought, you know what, this documentary, I just want to come at this with pure sort of focus on the students and an empathy, just an acknowledgement really of how much it's changed in one generation. What I worry is that people like you and me, we might say to younger people, wow, you've got to go to uni, it's the greatest thing in your life, you'll meet people. And we're actually talking about a world that no longer exists. Like when your parents used to say, oh, I'm going to take you to Morecambe. And you go, Morecambe's not what it was when no offence, well, some offence to Morecambe, evidently, I'm in now. But that's what I wondered is, are we doing that thing of pretending that seaside towns are what they used to be? And when young people are spending that much money, I think the very least that we owe them is honesty.
Chris in Bath says, I'm a university professor, and over the last 12 years we've put huge efforts into student training in writing and critical analysis. Don't assume grade inflation is a fact not to be challenged. We're all working to improve our students' skills.
Well, I mean, it doubled. I mean, I think most of your listeners would say that however much good work is going in, and again, this is partly what I've got, is people are working hard to give students a good education. I understand that. But when the amount of first doubles in 10 years, I struggle to see how much work you would need to put in to get those outcomes. There's no doubt that students are more professional and more diligent than they were when they just think, how I spent the first 2 years of my course. They're working harder, but a doubling of and it should be said the university sector themselves have acknowledged that this is a problem, and they've been working on it, and I think that they've reduced it, but only by about 4%.
Do you think there is still a degree of snobbery in the university world where some universities are inevitably seen as worth more than others? And if you go, it's invidious to give examples, but if you go to the University of Bristol or Exeter, that's seen as a sort of, shall we say, rather more worthwhile pursuit than going to one or two of the former polytechnics.
Yeah, you can't get away from the reality on the ground, and what's certain is that a lot of people will point to the fact that graduates will still earn more in their lifetime. Average earnings will still be higher. But if you dig into those figures, if you dig into the numbers, you realise that skews heavily towards certain courses, certain vocational courses, certain red brick universities. And I found some startling things in the course of doing this documentary, one of which was that a male doing creative arts degree financially would be better off going to work straight from school. Like, there's a net loss from doing a degree. Now, of course, studying something you're passionate about.
Just looking at it financially and what they're likely to earn
financially,
afterwards.
yes. And I admit, I'm guilty of looking at things maybe too much through that lens. But if you were coming out of 20 grand's debt, maybe you could look at it differently. But when it's 50 grand, it really does focus the mind. One thing that was interesting, actually, as well, is that as a comic, as you can imagine, I was so keyed up to find these Mickey Mouse degrees. I thought, please can we find that there's a whole university course to study in The Simpsons and golf course irrigation, or something like that. And you know what's interesting is there's not that many. I think that is a myth, actually. And when you stop and think about it, it makes sense, because people can't afford, in some ways, to be that frivolous. So what you're seeing now is a move of people going away from humanities courses to business studies and courses that they feel that they can monetize more directly and immediately.
Is that necessarily a good thing, though?
No, I'm not sure it is.
The move towards more vocational degrees, because you can see the argument for it. But when I went to university, I intended to be a German teacher. Now, my life took on a different turn. I've never been a German teacher, but I don't think I wasted my 4 years at university doing a degree in German at all.
You didn't, but how would you feel if there was 50 grand's worth of debt that was over you for 10 years?
Well, you see, that's the other thing, in that I don't think I would have gone. And yet, if you look at the statistics, the fact that loans and fees have been introduced has not actually put off people going to university. No. Either people who were the first in their family, like I was, or people from working class backgrounds. There's actually a higher participation now, I think, of working class students than there was before fees were introduced.
Well, what we've also got is a situation with loans. Now, a lot of people will say, in sort of almost whispered tones, well, look, a lot of people won't even have to pay them back. But that's not irrelevant in itself. That's eventually the state foots the bill for that indirectly. The amount of debts that will eventually be wiped off, it's estimated, will be a figure that's competitive with COVID on some level. People can fact check me on that, but that's as I understand it. So, and the other thing that people tend to say is, well, you might not even earn at that threshold anyway. We go, well, that's not a positive, is it? Like, whereas having a degree, you felt like a kind of, you were a made guy, right? That you were going to go into the world and you were going to get a good job. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, most of you might not, well, some of you might not even have to pay this back anyway. So it's just about trying to work. Look, I'm uncomfortable with some of the things that I ended up thinking, I'll be honest, because some of what I ended up thinking was that the things I was able to do, maybe I wouldn't advise my son to do. But the realities of now having had tuition fees for the best part of 30 years is not that it's just different to it was in your day or my day in the 90s. It's even different to what it was 10 years ago now. And there are other things that people can do. And, one of my favourite bits of the film is when I spent a day with some plumbers from Hull. I'm a bit obsessed with plumbers generally. I don't know what it is. I just feel like it's a proper job. They're proper blokes, fixing and building stuff, and they earn well. Like you've never met a skint plumber.
No.
Ever. They're as busy as they want to be. So I'm not saying that it's totally easy to walk into an apprenticeship, But that is another route.
We finally got a plumber to come around to the house to quote for a new boiler, because I think it's about 30 years old, and came around the other day, and he said, "No, can't do it. It's a two-man job, mate. Two-man job." I was thinking, that sounds like an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
So they do quite well generally, I think. Well, look, I want to get some feedback from you because the question we're asking is the title of Geoff's documentary: is university really worth it? Is it all it's cracked up to be? If you've been to university in the last 5 or 10 years, is it something that you've come to regret, or is it something you think, no, I had a really good time. It turned me into the person I am today. And I think nobody can go to university and not be affected by the experience one way or the other. Did you feel that you got value for money? The debt that you've been landed with, was it worth it despite the debt? 0345 6060 973. And how would you like to reform our university system to make it maybe more attractive to people? Are we still obsessed by sending so many people to university when the dropout rate in some universities can be up to sort of 20-25% in the first year? Something's going wrong if that's the case, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. It's 19 minutes past 9.
This is LBC.
Life is here talking about his new TV documentary, Is University Really Worth It? You can catch it on the BBC iPlayer. It's well worth it, actually, because even if you don't like documentaries, as you know, I mean, Jeff's got a light touch to it. It's not like an hour of laughs.
No, it had to be.
It's entertaining, I would say.
That's what he wanted. Popular factent is what they call it. He's trying to maybe hit an audience that don't always watch those kind of documentaries. So there's moments of levity in it. I think the moments when levity wasn't appropriate would be very obvious. But there's one scene at the end where I wanted to stress test my idea that plumbing is the one job that AI could never do. Because I don't think any computer could ever understand a Victorian semi. And don't do a joke about semis. I
was way ahead of you.
All the bodge jobs that dads have done on it. So I went to meet this robot that actually has a human sort of face.
That was funny.
Well, it was just bizarre because I was a bit hungover and I'd been talking. It thought that I was talking Welsh, and I genuinely thought I'd been drugged at that point. But I did put my theory to Amica. As well, it's just a very weird first date is probably the best way to describe it. But I put my theory to her that plumbing is the only job that AI could never do. And look, I think people should watch it. They might be interested as to what she said in response.
Chris in Bath says that this is not an argument. Doubling is a meaning. This is about grade inflation. Doubling is a meaningless value. Okay, this sounds like a philosophy course, doesn't it?
Might need a degree to answer this one.
Exactly. I can easily transfer a 2-1 student to a first with the right training. Plus, some professional careers require an accredited degree. So instantly, these degrees are not relevant to the debate, e.g., medicine, psychology, engineering.
So what he's mentioned, the point. What's the point he's making?
I think this is the same texture as I read before.
But Pete, this is what I'm finding with people is they often get in sort of locked down in the grade inflation thing. Let's talk more broadly about the student experience. In a recent YouGov survey, 69% of students felt that their degree wasn't worth it. And that's not saying they didn't enjoy it or weren't passionate about their subject. These are people who've graduated and felt that the degree wasn't worth it. And there's a lot of people now that are saying that if you really want to have that kind of foot in the door in the workplace, you've got to do a master's now. You've got to take it, you've got to take it 1 year.
Which is the case in America.
Yeah.
Everyone does a master's in America.
I mean, for balance, because I've been working for the BBC for a while, it becomes an instinct.
Oh dear.
Here you go, impartiality, but for balance. I did meet a very good Vice-Chancellor of Sheffield Hallam University, and he said to me that, advanced economies, such as South Korea, a lot of them, we've got about 40% of young people doing higher education. They're looking at 70% and beyond. So it's not, the number that we've got is still perhaps a little bit lower than other countries. So I'm not disputing that it's a preference for a society to have a highly educated group of people, but as the country's finances have changed and the cost, it's really hard when the cost of something has gone up a lot, and some people would say the value of it seems to have gone down a bit as well. Those two metrics do seem to be moving in the opposite direction.
Do you want to put your headphones on? Let's take a call or
yes.
two. Nicole is a new caller in Ross-on-Wye in Herefordshire. Hello, Nicole.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Geoff.
Hi, Nicole.
I'm just calling in because I have a child who is just about to graduate from Edinburgh University, having started in COVID. And I can tell you it was a very tense time starting a child at university in COVID. He was in catered accommodation, but they were not allowed to sit together. They had to sit on individual exam tables and were separated while eating. They were only allowed to mix with their people in their little bubble of 8 rooms in their, you know what I mean? They have their accommodation was 8 separate rooms in one pantry, as they call them. And he didn't get on with anybody in his pantry. So he spent the whole time of the first year sneaking down to a pantry on another floor to meet people.
I mean, it's interesting that people that have stopped me in the street, and a neighbour actually spoke to me, people wanted to talk about the experience that their children or grandchildren had during COVID. Now, obviously, it was a difficult time for everybody, but there is a feeling that some universities did not show a sufficient duty of care and that they were slow to resume face-to-face teaching, and some of them did take on extra students and they had lower overheads. This is just a personal opinion, and it's not the opinion of the BBC. I think that the legal action against universities could one day become like a PPI for the higher education industry, because I think that those young people are owed something, whether it's 500 quid or something like that. What they went through was traumatic.
In particular, I mean, Nicole, you will be aware of this, about the lecturer strike and the effect on your child's education because of that. And a friend of mine's at Edinburgh University and seriously thought of giving up after 3 years of a degree, had another year to go, was going to go to America and do the 4th year there because he couldn't be confident that he would actually get a degree because the papers hadn't been marked. I mean, it's outrageous.
And now he would like to do a PhD, but he's been told he needs a master's. Well, that's another year. So he's done 4 years. So we're up to God knows what with debt. We've got another year to do a master's because they say he has to have a master's to do a PhD. Now, I went like Ian in the 80s, first person to university, did a science degree like he's doing. I could have gone if I'd got a first, but of course I didn't, because only 2 people in our year got a first, straight to a PhD.
I mean, I think that it is
a money-making machine. Honestly, I'm so cynical about it now.
It is tough, when you look at that cohort of students that studied. In the film, there was a student called Tia who went to study art, and it was a big passion. And obviously, art more than anything is a tactile experience where you want to be working on certain machines and honing your skills. And she was literally at home in her parents' house watching lectures on YouTube. Now, again, of course, the country was in lockdown at that time, but they were reluctant to go back to having actual in-person lectures, and I think that there's just a duty of care to those students, and it's true to say, actually, it should, as a balance, is that a lot of students are sympathetic to the reasons that lecturers are striking, but like all strikes, they still end up as the collateral.
You've changed, Geoff Norcott. I never thought I'd hear you utter the phrase, well, of course, I can't speak for the BBC.
I just worried. You see, the problem is when
it's corrupted you.
Well, the thing is, when you upset really clever people, I'm just worried that there's going to be some sort of dissertation or theory like Geoff Norcott is asterisk. But the thing is rather than a normal troll, they'll do it in 20,000 words.
Yeah, quite. Right, we're going to take more of your calls. Nicole, thank you very much. Great call. Do call again. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can WhatsApp us on the same number. You can text 84850 or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And don't forget, we are streaming this live on Global Player. Let's get the latest news headlines at 9:30 with Daryl Jackson.
Rishi Sunak has ruled out holding a general election on May the 2nd. The Prime Minister has previously refused to make any definitive statement and suggested it would be in the second half of the year. The Ministry of Defence is yet to comment on reports Russia jammed the satellite signal of a plane carrying Grant Shapps. Journalists travelling with the Defence Secretary to the UK from Poland said the interference lasted for about 30 minutes. And the government has named the groups who will be reassessed under a new definition of extremism. Michael Gove has told MPs it will now be defined as the promotion or advancement of violence, hatred or intolerance. LBC weather, persistent rain easing in Northern Ireland and Scotland tonight. Some heavy showers for England and Wales and a low of 2 degrees.
This is LBC.
School.
Geoff Norcott. It's 9:34. He's done this TV documentary, Is University Really Worth It? And I think that's a question that not just parents of students are asking, it's students themselves. And I'd almost like to eavesdrop on conversations that go on with a sort of 16, 17-year-old who's wondering what to do after school. Do I go to university like all my mates are, or do I sort of break the mould and do something a bit different, or take an apprenticeship, or do, I don't know. Because there is now, I think, an expectation among parents that, well, if my child doesn't go to university, they've failed in some way, which I think is not how it ought to be, Geoff.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, is when something becomes an orthodoxy. And I was part of the teaching fraternity in the early noughties, right? I was a new Labour guy. I was just 5 educations. I didn't think he said enough. Like, just keep saying education. And because you get to feel good about yourself. You get to feel that you've helped somebody pass a point in their life where their life is always going to be better as a consequence. And I've got to be clear, I'm not knocking degrees. It's a brilliant thing to go to university, and it's just the maths have changed so significantly, and it takes a while sometimes for society to wake up for that fact. I mean, I'll give you like a parallel example which might ruffle some feathers, but when I was young, the word pensioner meant the most vulnerable in society, right, for a long time, and it was based on a hard reality. You know, in modern times, what you would call pensioners, some of which are the wealthiest generation that they've ever been, like, in terms of assets. And I think sometimes the language around degrees has always been extremely positive, and that will never change. But I think maybe there's a little lag in how we perceive their worth. You shouldn't have to spend 45 to 50 grand just to keep up. It should be you're spending that kind of money to get an advantage.
Just had a text from a friend of mine saying, I want to add something intelligent to your conversation, so I just want to tell you that Geoff is my weird crush, that is all.
Why weird?
Well, if you don't know.
You're into guys with big foreheads and sunken eyes.
Right, this texter says, I'm a mature student at Bristol. This is my second degree, which I'm incredibly fortunate to have the opportunity to do. I've been shocked by the amount of pre-recorded online lectures being delivered as standard. It's relentless and is prioritised over in-person teaching on my course, which is a challenging healthcare degree. My last degree, which I graduated from 10 years ago, was fully in person. It was so much more engaging. I would research my course more next time. I think the university is really offering less value than it should be, and it's taking the mick. Well, that plays into your idea about this is the next big scandal.
Well, a lot of people have been in contact with me in terms of how they're pressured and lent on to upgrade essays and past students that might not have otherwise passed. We've got a whistleblower in the film themselves. I guess the issues that universities have, it's almost like, I guess, what the lefties would call the industrial prison complex, right? Something that grows because it has to grow. And they have had their fees capped at 9,250 for quite a while. So they would say, I guess, that they're having to make cuts elsewhere while the government refused to increase the fees. But then a lot of people will be aware that the amount of foreign students coming in is really high at the moment. And that's a good way of them
Which ought to be a good thing.
It should. Well, it is, yeah.
But you get the impression that some universities are just catering everything to attracting foreign students, and the British students are therefore in some ways losing out.
Well, look, the people that have been in touch with me, all I can sort of attest to is what people have said to me privately, is that the threshold in terms of their academic qualifications to do the courses is a lot lower than often for British students, but they're often paying 3 times as much. And I guess the unis would say, well, that's what we have to do because the fees have been frozen. But it all adds up to a sense of a slightly dysfunctional sector.
Let's go to Anne in Guildford. Hello, Anne.
Oh, hello, Ian. I've got 2 grandsons, one who's been through university, got a degree, and but he did it all through COVID. He was doing law. He got no group discussions, no face-to-face lectures, no work experience, but he got his degree and he's got a very good job. And the other grandson, who's about to finish his master's, he was standing in the kitchen with me when he was about 17 and said, do you know, I don't see the point in going to university, Granny, I really don't. But, it's been the making of him, his personality. I can't tell you the confidence. how well he's done. And then I've got a granddaughter who's had 5 offers. She's just narrowing it down to 3. And she desperately wants to go.
Because she's seen the experience of her.
Yep. And one
brother.
of the cousins took her for her tour around one of the London universities, and he said, "Oh, I'd quite like to do another degree." But but none of the parents have been to university on either side, and I certainly didn't.
I mean, it is still a wonderful thing to do, you know, an experience of potentially going to another city, meeting new people. And, you know, one thing I found in discussion with the students, because the social life is also a very different thing to what you and I would have known. And obviously...
Thank God for that.
Well, look, I mean, I'm very Gen X. I sort of think that everyone should be out on the rage the whole time. But obviously that doesn't need to be the case. But one thing that they did sort of say to me was when I said, look, you know, are you aware of how the debt is calculated? I was struggling to understand in some cases why they did it, but they're also conscious of the retirement age going up and up and up, right? A lot of them are just thinking, yeah, it is imperfect. The debt is, it will be a millstone around my neck. But why wouldn't I want to postpone adult life for a little bit longer? And I can totally understand that because I don't know when I'm going to retire. That generation, in theory, could be working till they're 75. So none of any of this is to decry the value and the experience as this lady's grandkids have been fortunate enough to have. It's just about whether there's a different kind of conversation that we need to have and whether students need to be making more informed choices.
Nick says, I did marketing at university only a few years ago. I'm working in a grad scheme in IT now and am not using any of the skills I gained while at university. Regardless of that, I would never have been considered for the job if I hadn't got my degree. You see, that's an interesting thing in itself, isn't it? Because there are so many jobs now which do require a degree, any kind of degree. And I'm never sure that's really the right thing. I remember years ago when I advertised for a PA and I put in the advert sort of degree level education, and I ended up employing a 17-year-old from a council estate in Newport because he just had the personality that I needed.
Well, it's so interesting that you say that. So some of the other interviews, obviously when you make a documentary, not all of it can fit into an hour, but we did meet people that work in recruitment and placement. And one of the consequences of the grade inflation phenomenon was that companies are now looking more closely at actual candidates, right? Which in a way is a positive thing. It's like, right, who are the people? We know that a degree is a marker. It's part of a sifting process where you can take a bunch of CVs and put them to one side and proceed with others. But what's happening in the workplace seems to be a more minute and granular focus on who people are, in the same way that for the same reason that you probably picked your lad from Newport.
Interesting, you assumed it was a lad.
I mean, the moment I said that, your lad from Newport, I immediately wanted to take those words back into my mouth.
You see, he's now 31.
Yeah.
He did actually then start a degree course, but then dropped out of it because it wasn't for him. And he's been an incredible success in the different jobs that he's had since then. And it's great to see how someone develops. I mean, he was with me, I don't know, for 2 or 3 years, and then went to work for a think tank and then a national newspaper, and has done really well. Right, Chris in the US says, over here there is also a large tuition problem which has led to more students going to community colleges which teach most of the same courses as the popular universities here, but at a fraction of the cost. That's because you aren't paying for the prestigious name, and you can get your associate's or bachelor's degree, which many people like, since they range from 2 to 4 years. A lot of young people worry a master's or PhD won't help them. I'll never forget a man in his early 30s I met several years ago. He finished his PhD but couldn't find work, so he had to work as a pizza delivery driver to pay the bills. He felt that he'd wasted his time. And there's so many things to come out of that. Partly, I want to pick up on the 2-year degree, because why is it that BA honours degrees or Bachelor of Science degrees, they're all 3 or 4 years. In America, they're 2 years. Why can't we do them in 2 years?
That is a really good point. You have to believe. I mean, just based on this is very parochial, but my own experience, there was certainly room within my first year that things could have been crunched down. We could have gone maybe at more of a fair old lick. This is a weird analogy, but people talk about going up to the Edinburgh Fringe and it costing a lot of money, and people going, well, we're going to do shorter runs. Maybe one of the answers is shorter degree courses, because some people would say, well, they should, degrees should be free. I'm not sure, given my views, that is definitely the answer as well. But the truth of the matter is that the only people in town that might be considering that politically would potentially be Labour, but they're not. So it's not going to happen, at least for a parliament, and probably longer. So it's nothing's going to change in terms of the fees. I don't imagine that they're going to go down. If anything, that they're only going to go up. So tough discussions need to be had. And your idea about the 2-year degree, I think that's something that should be looked into.
0345 6060 973. More calls to Geoff Norcott on his documentary, Is University Really Worth It? Coming up in a moment. It's 9:45.
LBC.
YouTube live stream, this viewer says, I've been paying my student loan for more than 4 years and the debt has actually increased because the interest rate is now up to 7.7%. I now owe £50,000. There is no chance of me ever paying all of that back. You see, that just undermines confidence in the whole system, doesn't it?
That's upsetting to hear. And that's one of the difficulties was when we were trying to talk to people about the student loan, which a lot of people defend and they say it's actually in young people's favours. Even if you don't eventually have to pay it back, it's still a debt against your name. Everyone wants the idea in their lifetime that they will clear their debt. And when I tried to get people to talk to me about how the debt is calculated, you would have had to had a degree, a master's in applied mathematics to even understand it. And then, it was all fine while interest rates were at rock bottom, but the moment they started moving, we have a situation like your caller there. The debt, they're servicing their debt, and the principal sum has gone up. That is dysfunctional.
We see, if I was advising Labour on education policy, that would be a simple thing to rectify, wouldn't it? Where you just make the system fairer. It can't be that difficult to do. Anne-Marie is a new caller in Esher. Hello, Anne-Marie.
Oh, hello there. Good evening. I just wanted to say that we've been talking about this, me and my husband, quite a bit. We've got 3 children, and only one's at secondary school and the 2 at primary, so it's a bit of a long-off conversation, but it'll come around quick enough. And both myself and my husband went to uni. I was very lucky enough to get a grant, and there was no tuition fees, and I didn't come out with any debt. And my problem is I don't necessarily know if university itself is going to be appropriate for my eldest. But what I fear is, because I'm not sure she's going to, go into being a doctor or something where you absolutely need to have done further study, so it'd be just almost like a nice two. But what I worry about is will there be a ceiling in her work later on? So she might go out and go straight into work, and progress quite far and not have debt. But will there come a point where recruiters won't look at her because she hasn't done a degree?
I think that's a fair question. That is where degrees do have value. All I can say is that the noises that I heard coming out of the sort of workplace were that is changing a bit, and that mixed learning is more of an option. If you want to potentially get employers to invest in you, because as we all know, when you work somewhere, once you get good at your job, advertising, recruiting and getting somebody else to do it is a hard thing for any company to do. Now, that's obviously an ideal situation, but it's really interesting what Anne-Marie says. I think that in a way, this film is really, I'm just articulating conversations that I think actually were being had around the country already.
Has your son watched it?
Has my son? Well, he's in the opening 2 minutes of it, but with his face blacked out. So
I thought that was a bit wimpy of you.
It's just I don't want him getting papped.
He'd have loved to have seen himself on television.
He probably would, but I suppose in this era of social media, I don't know. Maybe I subconsciously don't want to share the limelight. He's a good-looking lad, and he's got a much lower hairline than I have. But the truth is, and this is full disclosure, he's a really bright boy, and in all likelihood, the academic prowess that he's showing now, university will be a natural choice for him. But I really think that if that's the case, it's on me to make sure as much as I can that financially he gets as much support as possible. But that is.
But does he watch the whole thing?
He's watched the I showed him the funny bits.
Right.
I showed him the funny. Like he's currently at the thing where he scrolls through YouTube things. The thing that he thought was funny about the documentary as well was that Daddy's car is in the documentary. It's probably one of the stars of the show is my battered Seat Ibiza, which I didn't think was that bad until the following day I started, because I drive around in it a lot and I'm thinking about, getting a better car. And then the texts started coming in from family just disowning me, frankly. And then I was getting texts from the family disowning me because of the state of my car, but then also texts in Welsh from my mates insulting me in Welsh because the robot that I spoke to kept speaking to me in Welsh.
But it sounds to me like your plan to buy a new car is going to have to go on the shelf for about 10 years.
Well, I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but yeah, I would say, I mean, people probably get the sense I'm not anti-university, but I was certainly veering one way, and who knows? Maybe the SEAT has already had its Viking funeral.
And what do you wish to replace the SEAT with?
Look, if people listen to my podcast this week, what most people think.
Which is a very good podcast. I recommend it to everybody.
Thank you. But there's a reveal. I reveal it to podcast listeners what actually happened, and it's fair to say that, you know, obviously I hammed that element of it up for the film, but it wasn't a fiction. That was a real process. Because the thing was, the more that the director filmed in my car, and the more that he took the mick out of it, the more that part of the story, in inverted commas, became a pressing issue.
I can see in an Audi Q5.
With me in an Audi Q5, I'm very tight when it comes to stuff like that. I would literally drive a cardboard box if it had good miles per gallon.
Okay, maybe not an Audi Q5. Right, Joe is a new... Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. Joe is a new caller in Shrewsbury. Hello, Joe.
Hi, fellas. How are we doing?
Hi,
Joe.
Good.
Just calling up, listening to it, it sort of shocked me that I've sort of had a moment of young adult realisation. It's 10 years since I went off to uni now. And I look back and think 3 years of an international politics degree, which I enjoyed, really enjoyed the subject matter. Picked a good time to do it as well, when they're not, because it was in the middle of what was the start of the Ukraine conflict, Brexit and Trump. So really interesting time to do it. But realised that to go into that world, I would need either a master's or to do an internship, which is something that at 21 coming out of uni, I couldn't afford to do. So I used my degree that I got to get a job in the automotive industry, which was completely unrelated. The only thing the degree has done for me in terms of on paper was get me that initial graduate job, which meant I earned a little bit more than people who were doing it who hadn't been to university and didn't rack up what is, I think, at the minute, a better part of 47 grand's worth of debt. I think it's at the moment, which I don't really like checking the student loan website because it makes me feel depressed, but hey-ho. 3 years later, decided to completely retrain, ended up training as a pilot, which I do now. So I look back now and think, and that's doing that training was with people who were coming out of sixth form, college, 18, 19 years old. Some of them didn't have A-levels. You have to have certain GCSEs, but they didn't have A-levels, or they might have done. Some were old people, perhaps in their 30s or 40s, but they didn't have a university education, and we're all now at the same level. And it's interesting at a job where you all have to have a certain, very highly meted out competency level. You're all exactly the same level. You always have to be pushing yourself to get higher up. But university, the lack of university, it does not affect them. The university for me, though, did do one thing, which was, I think for a lot of, this might be a stereotype, but I think particularly lads, it did help me grow up. Because I think would I have wanted to be a pilot when I was 18, 19? Yeah, I came very close to getting on the course to do it, but I didn't feel ready. And I'm glad I didn't, because at 18, 19 years old, I was not emotionally intelligent enough, responsible enough, anything like that. And I think there are some people I know who I did my course with who are, and it's a stereotype again, but I think most of the girls seemed more responsible and emotionally intelligent at that age to do it. But for some of the lads, it felt like they needed perhaps 1, maybe 2 years in either university or out in the world, just getting that bit of life experience. And I felt that's what uni gave me. Is it worth 47 grand of debt now? Hard to tell, really. But at the time, it felt like I did need it.
Could I ask a question, Joe? In terms of so are you actively repaying it at the moment?
Yes. So since I started my job in aviation, I am now. I was repaying it briefly when I was working in the automotive sector, but not very much. I think 1 month they took £7 off me when I first started. And you think, what's the point? But I am now repaying it, but it's still. This has only been for a few months since I finished qualifying last year and have now got a job. So if you're being honest, it's a couple of £100 a month. I think it works out at.
Couple of £100 a month, and is there kind of an end date for that? Because one of the things that I found making documentaries, it all seemed a bit opaque. If you're servicing any debt, you want a clear idea of, right, when does this end, or does it end? Does it sort of effectively operate as a graduate tax?
I think that's probably a very good way of putting it. I don't, without looking at the SLC page, I don't know if it's just explicitly said if you carry on at this rate. I mean, you could probably work it out, but it's all variable on pay. And whilst I do have a basic salary, I also there's a variable pay element to what I earn. So that does change month to month. So that will affect it. It is very opaque. it does feel like I don't, we sort of discussed this figure of, we all thought it was about 45. But I went to University of Wales, so alongside some of my, best mates. We look and go, I grew up on the border with England and Wales. Someone who lived 5 miles away has got a third of the amount of debt as me. That's obviously the nature of,
But you're not jealous at all, Joe, we can tell. Thank you very much indeed. We've reached the end of the programme. Geoff Norcott, thank you very much indeed. If you want to watch his documentary, it's on BBC iPlayer. Is University Really Worth It is what you want to search for. And also search for his brilliant podcast, What Most People Think. Well, thanks for all of your calls and messages this evening and throughout the week. I'll be back on Monday from 7. On Cross Question next week, we have the Conservative Cabinet Office Minister Esther McVey, the Minister for Common Sense. Insert own joke here. Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh and the Independent's political journalist Zoe Grunewald. Coming up at 1 on LBC is Clive Bull, but right now the man who undoubtedly got a first-class degree, Ben Kentish.
Did, I'm afraid, Ian.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Sorry. Let's move on. Thank you, Ian. Coming up.
When you're talking about pay based on performance, I think taxpayers will look at the performance of MPs and really question whether this pay rise is warranted.
MPs are given another pay rise, this one over 5%, and it's going to take their total salary to more than £90,000 a year. And that, of course, is before you factor in the second jobs and all the expenses that they get. But is this really the outrage that so many people seem to think it is? There's 650 of them. They're our national leaders. We give them huge responsibilities to represent us. Isn't it absolutely right that the leaders of our country should be paid that much? In fact, shouldn't they be paid quite a lot more?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, the Prime Minister's confirmed we won't be heading to the polls on May the 2nd for a general election, the day the local elections take place. There's been speculation Rishi Sunak could call a national ballot for the spring, but he says his working assumption is